Okay, let's go.
Hello everybody and welcome to the first info-sec live stream, Cyber Leaders Live. My name's Simon Linstead. I'm the founder of the info-sec live community. Going to talk to you a little bit about who we are. We are a community for aspiring and existing cybersecurity professionals who are looking to raise their game and get some direction. And I'm proud to say we have strategic partnerships with the whole Cyber Human Initiative, Boots to Books, and Chris Foulon Coaching. All of us are trying to break down those barriers to enter into this industry. Please do come along and join us. But without further ado, the main topic of the evening is meeting one of our industry's biggest leaders. And I have great pleasure in welcoming Thomas McKenzie, the CEO and co-founder of Ranked Right.
Hey, Simon, how's it going?
Hey, Thomas, I'm very well. How are you?
Not bad, thank you. Not bad.
Good. So thanks ever so much for joining us. Rather than me sit here rambling on like I do most of the time, please tell us a bit about yourself.
My name's Thomas. I'm as Simon said, the co-founder and CEO of a company called Ranked Right. We work in the vulnerability management space and we help organizations to build their own way of prioritizing the security vulnerabilities so that they're able to ultimately remediate them as quickly as they possibly can in an order that makes sense and is aligned with their risk appetite.
Awesome.
Oh, I was about to say that my background.
No, sorry. Go on.
My background is in offensive cybersecurity and vulnerability management. I've spent some time in business development too, but yeah, my background is technical, penetration testing, and that's me.
Well, the reason for my very rude interruption was to try and get you to expand on that a bit. And our audience are a mix of existing professionals and those aspiring to break in. So it'd be great if you could just tell us a bit about how you got into the industry yourself.
Sure. So I, as you can tell from my accent, I'm from the UK, and I was looking to go to university. And I'll be honest, I was never really an academic guy, and was trying to find something that like piqued my interest. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, like I actually wanted to be an actor. That was my that's what I wanted to do. So I applied to like a bunch of drama colleges, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, ended up getting accepted into Cambridge University. And being kind of a love-struck teenager, I realized that if I wanted to stay with this girl, then I needed to do something that had better job prospects. So that's really shallow.
That's beautiful. I think I wish we had some appropriate music to play in the background there, Mr. Moderator, but we haven't. Sorry, Thomas, carry on.
So I kind of like looked to see what was going to be of interest to me, and I saw a degree at Northumbria University called Ethical Hacking for Computer Security. I'd always been interested in IT. It was kind of like a secondary passion. I did a lot of like online gaming back in those days, and I thought I would go ahead and do it. I very quickly realized whilst I was at university that I wasn't going to learn what I needed to learn I wasn't going to learn what I needed to learn to get a job. You know, it would give me a piece of paper, but it wouldn't anyway. It wouldn't get me the job itself. So I started doing like research in my spare time at university, and I found a vulnerability in WordPress, and that got, at the time, it got some, like, it was big. Like, a lot of people spoke about it.
When was this, Thomas?
2010, maybe.
Yeah.
2010. Yeah, it wasn't a particularly like interesting vulnerability, but it was, you know, it was interesting enough that like it was on the homepage of the WordPress website. Anyway, I ended up getting a job whilst I was at university, working part-time for a penetration testing company based in Leeds. And then I realized, like, from there, I'd already got the job that I wanted, like, you know, and I was about to spend another, I don't know how much, like £10,000-20,000 at university, like, to get the job I already had. So I actually ended up leaving university to start. I moved down to London, starting work for another cybersecurity consultancy, and that's basically where my kind of entry into the industry came from. Was a kind of
a love-struck teenager.
Yeah, well, basically a love-struck teenager, and also kind of this what, you know, in the past I've termed as a mistake, like going to university. But the reality is, if I hadn't have gone to university and hadn't have been so frustrated at like the quality of the degree and like what I was actually learning, I would never have ended up in the position that I'm in now. So it's kind of like a blessing in disguise, if that makes sense.
It does. I think, I mean, I've said it a lot, not just on live streams, but to everyone I speak to. I've learned more from my, I suppose, perceived mistakes in the past. And you could, you know, with that, you could look at it as a mistake or as something that has really ended up you breaking into the industry in the first place, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think.
So what happened next then, Thomas?
So, I mean, normal story. I was living in London. I was absolutely skint, had no money. And I bounced around a couple of jobs. So I left. I was working for a company called Trustwave, large managed security service provider. And then I moved to Visa, or as they were termed back then, Visa Europe. And I did like internal penetration testing and some vulnerability management stuff there. And there was a strong focus on PCI. And then I moved back into consultancy, spent some time again testing. And then I kind of, there was like a bit of a wave that hit me whilst I was this was at NCC Group. I kind of like looked at some of the really strong testers at NCC, and I realized that other than some additional like small responsibilities, you know, leading a team on a particular project, etc., that actually the job is no different. And I asked one guy in particular, like, and you know, he was a lot older than I was, and like, you know, what are your aspirations? Like, where do you want to be? He was like, I love my job, and that's fine. But for me, I needed something bigger. I needed to do something different. And I basically went in on a day off. I went to go speak to it was, at the time, was like my boss's boss, and I said, look, like, I'm a bit like downhearted. I'm a bit, you know, I'm a bit lost. Like, I don't really understand what's next for me. And after a kind of a whirlwind conversation and a couple of other conversations internally at NCC, I ended up moving into sales. So I moved into sales and started looking after some like finance customers. And I had
sales of what, Thomas? What were you selling at the time?
Penetration testing, basically.
Yeah.
Penetration testing. And the whole suite of services that NCC Group provided back then. And I was given this side hustle. Was, you know, they were starting to do some research and some work in the automotive space, and they were like, you know, you're one of the more technical people that we have in the team. It's a technical sell. Do you want to work with this director to try and get something off the ground? And after about a year or so, it became a fully fledged like practice within the business. So I ended up running and was the commercial leader for the transport cybersecurity practice at NCC Group, until I ended up leaving and I moved to IBM to run the IBM X-Force Red team, which is their penetration testing team in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So when I joined, there was about 40 odd people in the team. And then we ended up taking over vulnerability management, which added another 40 or so people into my team. So by the end of my time at IBM, I was leading a team of around 80 people delivering both penetration testing and vulnerability management.
Wow.
So yeah, that's my background.
And was that the last role you had before you founded RankRight?
Yeah, that's correct.
It
Yeah.
was. Okay. So it's clear, I suppose, why you founded your own business from having such an amazing oversight of the industry as a whole over the previous 10 years. But what do you see as the biggest challenges moving forward for the industry?
As a whole, you mean cybersecurity?
Yeah, as cybersecurity as a whole, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe not, way into the future. I'm not sure, but generally, like at this moment today,
Yeah.
I think you don't have to go to many different, vendor websites and blogs, etc., to learn that ransomware is kind of the biggest thing that's facing companies at the moment. And a lot of companies talk about some different things, but when you think about ransomware, it's less about like the vector in which people are attacked, but more about the impact of them being attacked, right? So the fact that your data is encrypted, you can't get access to it without paying these ransoms or doing some instant response stuff, and you're lucky that keys are available, or you can reverse X, Y, and Z to be able to get your data back, or ultimately just reset from the start or from a backup. Yeah, I believe ransomware is the biggest thing at the moment. And it's interesting because being in kind of a startup and seeing the startup kind of ecosystem that's kind of forming over the last year or so, there's a big focus in ransomware. There's some really interesting kind of approaches that some companies are taking, and I've seen a lot of demos and a lot of talks from what others are doing. But look, the thing that like really frustrates me with ransomware as a concept of being what I'm saying is the biggest problem in cybersecurity right now is that if you look, historically over the different ransomware variants and the problems that organizations have had over the last, few years with ransomware, the majority of it could have been stopped with better vulnerability management and better patch management, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if it relates directly to ransomware attacks, but if you look at the number of organizations that are breached with kind of 0-day vulnerabilities, the number is astronomically small. You're talking, 2% or lower in some research that I've read. So in that kind of vein, if you think about that, I mean, let's take what, could arguably be the most prolific kind of, incident that's occurred in the cybersecurity incident to date, which is the propagation of the WannaCry like malware, right? Or with the Eternal Blue exploit. Eternal Blue was a vulnerability that people knew about for some time before people were impacted by WannaCry. And with good vulnerability management, with good patch management, they would have been able to identify the risk, prioritize the risk, and ultimately remediate the risk as well prior to any of this stuff going on. Obviously,
Let me play devil's advocate here, because the CISOs that I've been speaking to will now turn around to you and say, all we do is spend our time frantically under-resourced trying to patch vulnerabilities. Is there a different way from the methods that are used at the moment? Do you think there's a different approach that can be used? I'm not asking you to do a sales pitch here, by the way. It's a genuine kind of question.
yeah, no, and I won't do a sales pitch. Like I'll talk at a high level about it. When I was at IBM, prior to us taking over the vulnerability management program within the team that I worked in, another part of IBM basically delivered vulnerability management. And one of the things that we saw kind of and Gartner wrote a really good report about this a number of years back, that it used to be the case that vulnerability identification was the problem. If you go back like 10, 15 years ago, like it really mattered things like what scanner you used in your environment and where it was placed and how you set it up and all of this type of stuff. But the reality now is that no matter kind of what scanner you choose, even if it's kind of like open VAS from an infrastructure perspective, which is free, which can be free, let's say, the reality is you can have a lot of vulnerabilities like knocking at your door. And to give you an idea, one of the statistics that was released in some of the research we did at IBM was, and IBM is a different kettle of fish, right, to what I'm dealing with now. But the average number of vulnerabilities identified on every single scan was about 1.7 million. So every single scan that we ran on behalf of a customer, we were identifying on average 1.7 million vulnerabilities, right?
Wow.
There's no way in hell an organization can fix that many vulnerabilities. That is just not possible. So we've moved from identification being the problem to prioritization and remediation being the problem, right? And when it comes down to an organization, how they can be better at vulnerability management, the thing that sits in the middle, this kind of triage prioritization, that's the bit that if you can shrink, you can get to remediation quicker, and you have more time to remediate, right? You have more time to fix the vulnerabilities that you've identified. If you spend that, we're going to be releasing some research relatively soon that we've conducted. We interviewed 600 professionals in the vulnerability management space, and of organizations, like small organizations with an asset count of around 250 assets. On average, organizations are spending around 7 hours per week focused on prioritizing their vulnerabilities. 7 hours is a long time per week, right? Especially for a small organization that may only have 1 or 2 headcount focused on cybersecurity. So if you can give that 7 hours back and give the vulnerabilities either to the team that's going to patch them, or give the person who's involved in the whole end-to-end process of prioritizing and remediating more time to actually remediate.
What's the biggest mistake? Well, not mistake. Maybe it's the wrong terminology. No, I'm going to use that word. What's the biggest mistake you use or you see companies use when looking at prioritization at the moment? So what?
I mean, I don't think it's controversial, but others think it's controversial, and
we love a bit of controversy. So come on.
And it's using CVSS. So when you run a scan, typically the scanner will report the vulnerabilities based upon a CVSS score. And for those that don't know, CVSS stands for the Common Vulnerability Scoring System. The Common Vulnerability Scoring System was created many years ago to help understand kind of the severity of a vulnerability, and it takes in a bunch of data around the ease of exploitation, whether at that time a fix or a patch is available for it, the impact that vulnerability has. But if you look at CVSS, there's a lot of problems, but there are 2 main problems. The first problem is this: it's technical score. The second problem is that it's what has been termed as a day one measurement. The vulnerability the vulnerability is identified, and the CVSS score is then calculated. It's very rare that CVSS scores are updated centrally. Now, I'm going to preempt some questions that come out the back of this. Like, a lot of the scanners now have their own vulnerability scoring system. So Tenable has like the VPR score, and Qualys, I can't quite remember what they have, like a module that you can add on. That for me is like an even bigger problem, because if you're prioritizing your vulnerabilities based upon the risk that somebody else is telling you to be bothered about. Look, I've spent like nearly 11 years in this industry, and let me tell you, if I went into an organization tomorrow and said, this is what you should be concerned about, this is your risk appetite,
I tell you, do one.
The company had laughed me out the door, right? Like, you've been in financial services, like the risk appetite is a
we spoke about this earlier, and 75% of my job as a financial consultant was ascertaining risk, discussing capacity for loss, and helping clients understand what risk actually meant to them. And for each company, I've said this to you before, for each company in whatever industry they may be, they're all going to have a different risk tolerance for different things. So to use one off the it's like, people are going to hate me now, work in banks. It's like going to your bank for financial advice.
Yeah, exactly. Now, some of them will argue, and to be fair, like some of them can argue correctly that their algorithm, is the best thing since sliced bread. They've done a lot of research into it. Blah 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 blah. We do take into account, personal circumstances because we have agents in the environment, etc. But their intellectual property as a vendor is focused on a secret algorithm that nobody quite understands, right?
Oh, we got a question. Look at that.
Wow, that's popped up.
Thanks, Christoph. So, how do you take into account internal or external compensating controls?
So, I mean, this is the whole point when it comes to what I was saying about the biggest problem I see in vulnerability management being utilizing those default or secret algorithm scores. By default, CVSS doesn't take into account compensating controls at all. There are methods in which you can do it, but if you found a way to, if you found a way to like automatically bring in those compensating controls, then you're onto a winner, right? Like you've won the game. When it comes to vulnerability management, in my eyes, and it comes to prioritization, there has to be a view from the organization as to what is my risk appetite and what compensating controls do we have that are going to kind of help us secure this, right? So all of that gets taken into account, and the question of how you do that, I don't feel I can legitimately answer without turning this
Well,
into a sales pitch.
I think, if I'm honest with you, I think the way the conversation's gone, there's no way we can't turn it into one because we need to get the answers. Tell us the different approach that Rank use and how it makes a difference, because it is important that people know. Because you're one of the people I met first in this industry, and I was working for a penetration testing firm, and I'd gone from trying to be a penetration tester to ended up being in sales. Bit like your story in a way, but you had more success being a tester than I did. And when we first met, not only did we get on, I thought, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I also felt an affinity with what you were, yeah, just leave it. Felt an affinity with what you were doing because of my financial services link. And the question I've asked you time and time again is, we had templated risks for certain types of industries in financial services who would have more prevalent risks than others in certain areas. Is that possible in this industry, or do you think it's too individual for each firm when it comes to look? I'm talking particularly about vulnerability management here.
No, I mean, different industries have different risks for sure. Like if I go back to when I was at Visa, it was during the kind of Chelsea Manning leaks and the kind of impact of WikiLeaks, and the Visa were getting DOSed all the time because of taking payments for WikiLeaks. There was like weekly meetings at Visa, like in terms of like the senior like leadership, the SLT meetings that were basically determining like what's our risk appetite at the moment, what are we concerned about, what are our risks, essentially threat models, right? And their number one risk at the time was anonymous and lulsec. And
Yeah.
in other industries, there are other areas. So if you take kind of any e-com or retail, etc., they have to abide by PCI. Even though you can argue that PCI isn't a great standard, ultimately if they don't adhere to it, or other standards in other industries, then they're in trouble, right? They can be fined or shut down or whatever it may be. Privacy, obviously, with GDPR and in California, etc. If you kind of fall foul of those, there are a lot of different risks in a lot of different industries. So for sure, they can be profiled differently. If you look at some research, not research, there was a paper that was released a few months ago by a number of kind of lettered agencies in the US, Department of Defense, CISA, and a bunch of others, FBI, that basically said that organizations that are a target for Chinese state-sponsored attackers, this is what Chinese state-sponsored attackers are doing right now. And it was something like they're focusing on newly discovered vulnerabilities that provide some initial access into the environment with some level of impact around remote code execution or potentially denial of service. So that right there, if you're an organization, you can argue like academia, potentially from an intellectual property perspective, could be targeted by Chinese state-sponsored attackers. That's the type of thing that they should be focusing on, not a random score from a vendor or a kind of pre-built score that doesn't change over time. Let me. I'm conscious that I'm talking loads, but let me tell you like one story from.
Well, can we? I'm conscious that we've only got probably about 10 minutes left, and I do want to hear about your platform because I think it's relevant. And I know we've got some CISOs in the crowd as well, so I'd like them to hear what you've got to say, because we all know I'm not very technical, but I think what you've put together ticks a lot of boxes and could potentially save a lot of time. So let's turn the last few minutes into that sales pitch we were trying to avoid, and you tell us a bit about Ranked Right.
So, as I mentioned, kind of throughout this, like I have a big belief that secret and like default algorithms don't provide the value that organizations need to be able to make a substantial kind of change within their vulnerability management program, right? If you're going to make a substantial change, you need to eradicate like certain parts completely. And for me, prioritization is a piece that can be, I won't call it eradicated, but can be immensely automated and also done in a way that fits you as an organization. So at Ranked Right, like our focus is on automating the prioritization process, but then further to that, helping organizations in some other ways to basically bring optimization. Our tagline, so to speak, is less admin, more action. Spoke with an organization kind of as we were, starting the build out of the Ranked Right platform, a managed service provider, and one of their customers had 6 members of staff dedicated full time to vulnerability management. And over the space of a year, 4 of them left due to burnout. I think
It's quite common. Yeah,
it's huge. Like so many vulnerabilities, don't know how to patch them, really bad KPIs from the leadership, and ultimately, they're getting hounded because somebody else in the business isn't patching the vulnerabilities they've identified. It's different for every organization. So what our focus is, and if I kind of take you step by step, the first thing is some organizations don't just identify vulnerabilities from one source. If you're lucky and you have the budget and you can spend the money, you may have a Qualys or a Tenable, but one of our customers has Tenable.io for some part of their environment. They use Nessus Professional for another part. They're relying on Fortinet Fabric Agent to do some scanning, like agent-based scanning somewhere else, and another tool too. So the first thing is we ingest all of that data and normalize it. But as we do that, we're enriching it with vulnerability intelligence data that we're gathering at least 4 times per day. We gather that data from over 100 different sources. So once that data is enriched, we then expose what we call data points. And those data points allow to create these rules, these triage prioritization rules that, I've been kind of edging around that allow you to ultimately build priorities based upon what you perceive as your risk, right? Now, sometimes what you perceive as risk isn't the right approach. You may not be able to do that. You may be, and this isn't belittling anyone, but you may be somebody who's been like landed with the cybersecurity responsibility, which is common in smaller organizations with no cybersecurity training whatsoever.
Yeah.
So our business is platform only, right? We work with partners to help you build.
I was then going to say that I think it's important that we clarify that you're not a direct to consumer offering. If anything, I think I'd even considered setting up my own consultancy to help deliver your product because I was so impressed with it. And it is those third parties, whether they're CISOs, managed service providers, or they're the people that you want to work with this, aren't they?
I mean, don't get me wrong. If you're some of the customers that we have on board right now, they use it directly because they've got a team and they understand and they can drive value from it. But we do work with managed service providers, security service providers, value-added resellers to help ultimately bridge that gap between we're just doing scanning and really don't have a clue what vulnerability management is into let's build you a program. Then anyway, once you've built these rules, we then have this kind of onboard task management process. So you can manage and track your vulnerabilities from open to close. You can mark vulnerabilities that need remediated. You can onboard the remediation team or the IT team or the sysadmin team so that you can all work collaboratively within the platform. And ultimately, our mission is to help drive efficiencies in the vulnerability management program, utilizing you as the secret source, right? Utilizing the customer or the managed service provider as the secret source, as opposed to not really understanding exactly what it is that is going into the prioritization piece. I have sold and have worked with other vulnerability prioritization technologies in the past, and they're great, right? They do a job. I just find it mad that people blindly trust rules sometimes that they don't quite know. So yeah, that's what our platform is and how it works.
And Have you got anything in the near future coming up that you want to talk about before we close off today?
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of pre-release something that I hadn't planned. You kind of put me on the spot there, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I knew if I asked you
don't,
at the start, you'd say no, so I thought I'd put you on the spot at the end on camera.
I don't want to say no.
You can say no if you want. You can
With
say no if you want. I mean, your email's on there. If people want to find out more,
no, let me tell you. So, I'm personally, and the team are personally very passionate about vulnerability management, and the fact that it isn't just these secret algorithms that are a problem with some of these other vendors. My belief is that the biggest barrier to entry is the price of some of them, and
Yeah.
what it does is it makes these vulnerability management these prioritization platforms very much focused on the enterprise. And obviously, when it comes to investment, it comes to like winning revenue, etc. The enterprise is the way to go. But for me, having worked in smaller organizations as well, I know that this isn't a problem that is isolated to the enterprise. This is a scalable problem.
Yes, but it isn't. It hasn't been scaled, has it? And this is what
Well,
I've seen coming into the industry. Everyone's tailoring towards enterprise level.
we've been speaking with an organization that has like 30,000 assets, and they're really struggling because they have millions of vulnerabilities. I've previously worked with an organization with over 1 million assets, and they're struggling. But last week, I had a conversation with a company that had 60 assets, and they honestly can't keep up.
Sorry for any US viewers. This is a very UK based quote with regards to a very poor soccer team that we have in the UK called Leeds, who Thomas is a supporter of, I believe. Thomas.
Yeah, of course. There he is.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll get that curveball away and let you carry on.
So anyway, these organizations are really struggling. There's absolutely nothing out there other than the manual effort that I talked about. And like I said, 250 assets on average, organization is spending 7 hours. That's mad. And I honestly can't like sit there and try and sell to these organizations because I don't feel right. Like there needs to be a level playing field. So we're in the process of releasing a free version of the Ranked Right platform. And that free version will give access to what organizations need to be able to build their own priorities within the vulnerability management, and to start aligning, vulnerability prioritization and the vulnerabilities that you need to remediate alongside your risk appetite and kind of your threat model as an organization. And
am I right in thinking then, as me as a consultant, I could have not a free one, but the paid version? I could have a Ranked Right account, which would then potentially have all of my different clients within it, or
the platform's multi-tenanted. Like as a service provider, you can have multiple organizations underneath it. Yeah.
Okay, Thomas. I'm conscious that we've run over time. Mr. Rogers, our amazing moderator, has just given me a little nudge to say that we have. So I'm gonna, unless you've got anything else you want to add quickly.
No, thanks for your time, Simon. I appreciate being on your show.
Well, we could sit here and talk all evening. It's been absolutely fantastic. I'd just like to say before we go, thank you very much to everyone for tuning in and watching. If you're watching it recorded, we're now going to play a little video to play it out, which is a message from some of our community members on why they find info-sec live such a great place to be. I'm Simon Linstead. That's been Thomas McKenzie from Ranked Right. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next week.
It's been so great to be part of this awesome community where you can learn, get potential jobs, and this is the part that the community has helped me the most, being able to get a great contract in security, and thanks for this.
You don't have to be super experienced in order to contribute. They really foster a sense of community, and they encourage everybody to contribute anything that they can, regardless of whether you're just starting out in your career or if you've been in the career for decades. I like the different challenges that they have, the different pathways that you can follow, the fact that you can join communities that are specific to you and your needs. It's a new and growing and thriving group, and I'm really proud that I was able to be a part of it from almost the very beginning.
It's given me a community I could lean on, and the people in there are always willing to help. I've also gotten to break into cybersecurity because of info-sec.live, and I'm very grateful for that.
Cybersecurity professional or are trying to become one, you need to get onto info-sec.live.
Whether you brand new to the field, whether you are pivoting from another IT career or you're pivoting from a non-IT career, this is the place for you to do. Also, even if you are an experienced professional, there will be something here that you can learn.
info-sec.live has been great for me because it's brought me closer to other like-minded people, and I've been able to pick the brains of some real industry experts that are also part of the community.
To the right place, because listen, let me tell you that info-sec.live is everything that it claims to be. A vibrant community. They've got all that you need on info-sec.live. Listen, to tell you, info-sec.live is addictive. Get on board. Come and get addicted.
Get on info-sec now.